The Middle Ages spanned nearly 1,000 years. Its beginning was marked by the fall of the Roman Empire. In this era, there were two centers of power, church and state, that were destined to clash. Most surviving music from the Middle Ages is religious or sacred, resulting from the patronage, or sponsorship, of the church. In the latter Middle Ages, cities began to rise and flourish. Great cathedrals were built, and works of art and literature were created. Great cathedrals such as Notre Dame in Paris, from 1663 to 1350, were constructed in the late Middle Ages. Universities were founded throughout Europe, and cities emerged as a center of art and culture. Trade was flourishing, and a merchant class arose outside of feudal society. Because travel outside of Europe was dangerous, different regions would exchange their natural resources for those they lacked. For instance, timber and fur from Scandinavia were traded for wool and cloth from Flanders. Literary masterpieces such as Chanson de Roland, Dante's Divine Comedy, and Chaucer's Canterbury Tales were written. Deeply set religious beliefs brought about violence, as evidenced by the knights embarking on the bloody Crusades. The Renaissance marks the change of European society from a religious orientation to a more secular one. It became an age of humanism, the focus being on human fulfillment on earth rather than on the hereafter. The age of science and discovery, voyages of Columbus, Vespucci, and Ponce de Leon opened up new avenues of trade. The invention of printing around 1455 is attributed to German goldsmith and inventor Johannes Gutenberg. Instead of Gothic cathedrals and fortified castles, palaces and villas were built. Realism pervaded the visual arts, as in Michelangelo's David and Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Musicians were supported by the church, city, and state, as well as royal and aristocratic courts. It was a good time for employment in music-related fields, so positions such as choir masters, singers, organists, instrumentalists, copyists, composers, teachers, instrument builders, and by the 16th century, music printers were abundant. The merchant class became a new group of music patrons. Most cultivated middle and upper-class individuals were amateur musicians. Music literacy became more widespread as a result of music printing. Early church music is an outpouring of the spiritual nature of the Middle Ages. Liturgy refers to the set order of church services and to the structure of each service. The collection of the melodies found in the liturgy is often credited to Pope Gregory the Great. These melodies were organized into volumes and became known as Gregorian chant, or also plain song or plain chant. These chants consist of a single-line melody which is monophonic in texture, meaning that it lacks harmony and counterpoint. They are non-metric and are set to a sacred Latin text. Chant melodies fall into three main classes according to the ratio of syllables to notes. A syllabic setting consists of one note per syllable of text. A pneumatic setting will have up to 5 or 6 notes sung to a syllable of text, and a melismatic setting has many notes per syllable of text. Chants were originally handed down by oral tradition until the number increased to the point where singers needed help remembering the shapes of the melodies. More than 3,000 chant melodies survive. The first system of notation consisted of neumes, which were little ascending and descending symbols written above the words to suggest the contour of the melody. Neumes eventually evolved into a system of music notation consisting of square notes on a 4-line staff. For 1,000 years, beginning with the Gregorian chant and continuing throughout the Renaissance, Western music used a variety of scale patterns known as modes. This modal system preceded the major-minor system. The services of the Roman Catholic Church can be divided into two categories: the daily offices, which are a series of services celebrated at various hours of the day in monasteries and convents, and the Mass, which is a reenactment of the sacrifice of Christ. The Mass is the most solemn ritual of the Catholic Church, and the one attended most often by the public. The collection of prayers that make up the Mass falls into two categories: the proper, with texts that vary from day to day, and the ordinary, with texts that remain the same in every Mass. The texts of the Mass are in Latin, with the exception of the Kyrie, which is a Greek text. A cloister is a place for religious seclusion that allows an individual to withdraw from secular society into the shelter of a monastery if you're a man, or a convent if you're a woman, and devote themselves to prayer, scholarship, preaching, charity, or healing. Hildegard of Bingen, 1098 to 1179, was the 10th child of a noble couple who promised her to the service of the Church as a tithe. She was raised by a religious recluse and took her vows at the age of 14. From childhood she experienced visions and was reportedly able to tell the future. She founded a new convent in Rupsburg, Germany, in 1150. Her major works include poetry collections and visions, a volume of religious poetry, a sung morality play, scientific and medical writing, and a liturgical cycle for the different feasts throughout the church year. Her music resembles that of Gregorian chant, but contains many expressive leaps and melismatic settings that convey the meanings of the words. Polyphony is the combination of two or more simultaneous melodic lines. It is an important development in the history of Western music, occurring at the end of the Romanesque era, between 850 and 1150. Polyphony helped bring about the development of a more precise method of rhythmic notation. Outside the cathedral, there was an ever-growing repertory of songs and dances that reflected all aspects of medieval life. Minstrels were a class of musicians who wandered among courts and towns, playing instruments, dancing, singing, juggling, presenting tricks and animal acts, and performing plays. They lived on the fringes of society. On a different level were the poet-musicians, often of noble birth, from the various courts of Europe. The troubadours were from southern France, the trouvères from northern France, and the minnesingers from Germany. The poetry praised the virtues of the age of chivalry, valor, honor, nobility of character, and quest for perfect love. These songs were sung monophonically with improvised accompaniment. Summer is a cumen in, summer is come, is one of the earliest examples of polyphony from England. Composed in 1250, it is set as a round, meaning that each voice enters in succession with the same melody. The text is written in Middle English, celebrating the coming of summer and the renewal of all living things. There is also a sacred Latin text as well, since the manuscript was copied at a religious institution. The sacred text is a reflection on the crucifixion. The round can be sung by up to 6 singers. 2 lower voices sing an ostinato, a short repeated idea. Listen in the upper voices for a lilting melody with a long, short rhythmic pattern throughout. The harmony sounds modern, employing thirds and sixths. The text is to be sung 3 times over, with the 2 insistent repeated bass parts. Ars Nova was a musical style that appeared at the beginning of the 14th century in France and Italy. It reflected changes in rhythm, meter, harmony, and counterpoint from its predecessor, Ars Antigua, which came to describe the Notre Dame school polyphony. Instrumental music grew in importance in the 14th century. instrumental arrangements of vocal works became popular. Most instrumental music was improvised. The instruments themselves were divided into two categories: soft, bas, or indoor, and loud, hot, or outdoor, according to their use. Early stringed instruments included the lute, which is a plucked string instrument with a rounded back, a mandolin, which is also a member of the lute family, and a vielle, which was one of the two principal bowed string instruments. Other soft instruments include the psaltery, which was a plucked string instrument, and the hammered dulcimer. Loud instruments used primarily for outdoor occasions included the shawm, which was the ancestor of the oboe, and the sackbut, which was the early trombone. Percussion instruments included the tabor, a large cylindrical drum, and knockers, small drums. Medieval organs came in different sizes and shapes. They were large organs that required a performer and someone to pump the bellows. There was also portative or positive organs that were smaller instruments with keyboards and only a few ranks of pipes. Some recordings today use early instruments for authenticity. The 16th century can be regarded as the golden age of the a cappella style. A cappella refers to vocal music without instrumental accompaniment. Polyphony in works of this era were often based on the principle of imitation, where musical ideas are exchanged between vocal lines that are closely knit in sweet-sounding harmonies, such as thirds and sixths, as opposed to the open fifths and octaves of medieval times. The composers would often use a fixed melody, the cantus firmus, as the basis for elaborate ornamentation in other voices. Triple meter was favored because it symbolized the perfection of the Trinity. In the Renaissance, the motet became a sacred form with a single Latin text for use in the Mass and other religious services. Motets in praise of the Virgin Mary were common because there were large numbers of religious groups across Europe who were devoted to her worship. These motets were usually written for 3 or 4 voices and based on a chant melody or other cantus firmus. Josquin des Prés, known as Josquin, was a Franco-Flemish composer who served for much of his career in Italy. Ave Maria Virgo Serena is an example of Josquin's use of voices and textures. The work alternates between imitative and homorhythmic, a texture in which all voices move together rhythmically, textures. The final 2 lines of text are a personal plea to the Virgin, indicative of the emotional and humanistic spirit of the age. The piece is a rhymed prayer to the Virgin Mary, written for 4-voice a cappella choir. Listen for high and low voices in the melody, singing in pairs. The rhythm is dual, with a shift to triple, then back. The cadences are hollow sounding. The texture is primarily imitative, interspersed with homorhythmic sections. The form is sectional according to the stanzas of the poetry. The final personal plea from the composer is in a very simple texture. Composers in the Renaissance concentrated their musical settings on the ordinary or fixed portion of the Mass that was sung daily. The 5 movements of the ordinary of the Mass are Kyrie, Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, Agnus Dei. Originally, these movements were sung in Latin, but now are recited or sung in the vernacular, the language of the country. Early polyphonic settings of the Mass were often based on a fragment of Gregorian chant that became the fixed voice, cantus firmus, that was the foundation of the work. Sometimes popular songs were used as a basis for the Mass. In 1517, Martin Luther, an Augustinian monk, began the Protestant movement known as the Reformation with his 95 Theses, a list of reforms he proposed to the practices of the Catholic Church for which he was excommunicated. The Catholic Church eventually responded with its own reform movement, the Counter-Reformation, which focused on a return to values. The Council of Trent was a long committee meeting that sought to regulate every aspect of religious discipline, which also included church music that council members felt had been corrupted by embellishments, the irreverent attitudes of musicians at the worship service, and the practice of incorporating secular songs and styles. They sought a pure vocal style that would once again restore the integrity and intelligibility of the text. These traits were embodied in the works of Italian composer Giovanni Palestrina. Giovanni Palestrina, called Palestrina, was an Italian composer, organist, and choir master. For a short time, he was a member of the Sistine Chapel Choir. His output was mostly sacred, including over 100 masses and motets. His most famous is the Pope Marcellus Mass. He also wrote madrigals, which are secular. Palestrina's Pope Marcellus Mass was originally thought to have been written to satisfy the Council of Trent's recommendations for polyphonic church music. However, this work was written several years prior to the Council of Trent's recommendations on music. It is written for a cappella, six-voice, all-male church choir common to the era. The highest voice parts were sung by boy sopranos, male falsettists, men singing in falsetto or head voice, the alto part by male altos or countertenors, tenors with very high voices. The opening line, Gloria in excelsis Deo, is sung monophonically by the officiating priest. Choral sections are polyphonic and balanced so that the text is clear and audible. Listen for shifts between high and low range voices in melody, slow duple meter with a weak pulse. The harmony is full and consonant. The texture begins monophonically, then becomes homorhythmic with some polyphony. It is through composed, no major sections repeated, with some short ideas exchanged between voices. The expression focuses on the clarity of the words. In the Renaissance, professional musicians were hired to entertain at court as well as civic functions. Music was played in the home as well, which created a demand for secular music that included vocals as well as vocals with instruments, such as the lute or keyboard. The study of music was considered to be part of the proper upbringing for a young girl. Thus, women began to have prominent roles in music performance. Two important genres arose that were the result of the fusion of poetry and music, the chanson and the madrigal. Word painting is the musical depiction of words from the text as an expressive device, and was a prominent feature of the madrigal. A madrigal is a vocal piece set to a short love poem of a lyric or reflective nature, either with or without instruments. The 16th century madrigal was the most important secular music of the Renaissance, flourishing in the Italian courts as well as in the homes of cultivated amateurs in both Italy and England. Love and unsatisfied desire were often the topics of the madrigal, though some had themes of humor, satire, politics, and scenes of city and country life, all set expressively to music. Instruments would often double voice parts. There were three phases of the Renaissance madrigal. In the first phase, 1525 to 1550, they were composed with the amateur in mind. Little thought was given to virtuosic display. The second phase was from 1550 to 1580, and the final phase was from 1580 to 1620, extending into the Baroque era. By the final phase, the madrigal had become a direct expression of the composer's personality and feelings through the use of rich chromatic harmony, dramatic declamation, vocal virtuosity, and the vivid depiction of the words in the music. Jacques Arcadelt was an Italian composer. He published a book of madrigals in 1538, which became the most widely printed collection of the time. This collection includes the famous madrigal, The White and Sweet Swan. Listen for lyrical conjunct lines with a focus on the highest voice. The meter is duple with some simple movement. The harmonies are mostly consonant, though there are some instances of chromaticism and dissonance. The texture is homophonic with imitative entries on the last line. It is through composed until the last line. This emotional text is a 10-line poem by Alfonso Dávalos, set expressively with some melisma for 4 voices, a cappella. References to death in madrigal poetry were understood as erotic, which in that light the text is given a whole new meaning. The English continued to develop the Italian madrigal. English composers eventually wrote their own madrigals, some in the Italian style and some with a simpler text and lighter style. Humorous madrigals were often written with refrain syllables such as fa, la, la. John Farmer was active as an organist and master of choir boys at Christ Church in Dublin. He moved to London in 1599, where his only collection of 4-voice madrigals was published. Follow the listening guide to John Farmer's famous madrigal Fair Phyllis. The 16th century was a time of growth in instrumental music, resulting from the invention of music printing. Books of dance music were published for solo instruments and small ensembles. These dances were often adapted from vocal works, such as madrigals and chansons. Instrumentation was not specified but was chosen according to the occasion. Loud, hot instruments for outdoor occasions, and soft, bass instruments for indoors. A number of dance types became popular during the 16th century. The pavane was a stately court dance, often the first dance of a set. Other dances included the Italian saltarello, jumping dance, the ronde, round dance, which was performed in a circle, usually in an outdoor setting, and many more. This section is a set of 3 dances from the popular collection of dances called Danzerie, which was published by Telemann Susato. Susato was well known as a printer, composer, and instrumentalist. This collection includes a variety of popular dance styles. In your recording, the dance is being performed by a loud wind band, which includes shawms of various sizes, a cornetto, a sackbut, along with percussion, including tabor and tambourine. Listen for the prominence of the melody. The dances are set in duple meter with short phrases. The harmony is consonants, often with full triads. Rond 2 is modal. The texture is mostly homophonic. Each dance is in binary form, A, A, B, B, and there is a return to the opening dance at the end. On the repeated sections, embellishments are improvised by the performer. The work is written as a 4-part instrument ensemble without specification. By the end of the 16th century, composers had achieved new means of expression in their music. The text of vocal works were eventually conveyed with a single melody rather than the interweaving of several different ones. The Baroque era saw the rise of the vocal genres of opera, cantata, and oratorio. In addition, the development of purely instrumental forms in music gave rise to both small and large ensembles.